This is TWiT.
Go Gadget Oculus Go, the Cord Cutters VR headset. I'm torn between being really excited because there's another VR headset release coming in the near future that I can't really talk about. But I thought this was interesting. You're looking at the intern at the Verge offices as they were trying to figure out how to do battery testing on this. But we're looking at this is a self-contained Snapdragon, I want to say 821 powered, VR display. Think 2016 flagship phone in terms of the specs, except obviously with a radically different screen experience. I got to say, my big disappointment at that is essentially this is a much better Daydream experience than cardboard or strapping your phone into a Daydream. It's a huge improvement, but you don't have access to the Oculus games, which makes it kind of fall apart for me. You don't have access to the Oculus PC games necessarily, right? But you do have access to the Oculus Store, which essentially has anything that Google Daydream would have plus a little bit extra, right? It's a nice headset. By all accounts, it's comfortable. It's a nice
headset. The hardware is not what you would find in a modern smartphone, but there's a couple of things that they do right. One is it's really cheap, right? This is $199 for the 32 gig model, $249 for the 64 gig model, which is, how much was a Gear VR when they're new? $100, $150, and that was for just the shell. But then you had to buy a $600 to $800 phone to put in it. So in terms of like lowering total cost for cell phone class VR, this is doing an excellent job of doing that. Also, this has a different kind of screen in it. What's that? Yeah, it does have speakers built in.
You should. I'm sorry.
On the edge.
You should talk about the screen because that's much more important than my obsession with the speaker implementation on that.
Okay, I will back you up on the speaker implementation shortly. But the screen is interesting in that it's an LCD screen. It's not an OLED screen. And so the downside to that is that the blacks aren't as deep, they aren't as dark. The contrast ratio isn't as wide as you would see like on a Galaxy S9 that's put into a Gear VR or something like that.
Costs 4 times as much.
Correct. But I'm here to tell you that I actually prefer the screen on this than I have with any other slot-in VR system. It is the screen door effect on this is incredibly minimal. These are 2560 by 1440 per eye displays, right? But this because of kind of the reduction in contrast, the screen door effect is almost gone. You can read text in this thing. I did the Plex VR deal where I watched 2 episodes of a TV show while sitting on my couch in front of my big TV, so it didn't make a whole lot of sense, but just for testing it out. And it was really pretty positive. Like I didn't feel like my eyes were getting strained or that I worried about any of those ill effects of poor screen implementation. So I came away and even though it's a 72 hertz peak refresh screen, it apparently either operates at 60 hertz or 72, not in anything in between. So it's less than the 90 that we've seen on other VR headsets. So that's could be concerning. In the things that I have done and watched, it hasn't really been that big of a problem. I haven't played a whole lot of games yet, but I did some like 3D experiences stuff, like a Star Wars thing where you're in a 360 environment and you can wander around, or not really wander around, but look around. I think the screen is really impressive. It's got fairly low persistence for an LCD, even compared to OLEDs. So that's a positive. You mentioned the speakers. So it sounds stupid that we would be that impressed with there being speakers on this, because there is a headphone jack, which is good. You want that in case you're trying to be actually totally immersed or you don't want to bother people around you. But they've implemented speakers kind of on the edges of the device here, a left and a right. And as a result, you don't have to put on headphones to use this if you're not doing anything that would require it, right? If you're just watching a video, if you're interacting with a game and that's already in kind of a quiet environment, it actually works really well. And I preferred it at my house because I wasn't completely cut off from the outside world. If somebody was walking around behind me or whatever in front of me, I could hear them. I had the TV on because there was an NBA basketball game, and while I was interacting and messing with stuff and testing it, I could listen for what the score was, whatever, if I wanted to take off the headset and watch that instead. So I think it's a novel addition that actually makes it a significantly more useful product as a quick hit device. Put it on for 20 minutes, take it off, as opposed to, oh, where are my headphones? Oh, I got the lightning ones with me, but these don't work on this. Now I got to find the adapter or whatever it would be. Sure. Although you still have that option if you want to use it on like a noisy plane or something like that, or you're trying to block out your family, whatever.
There's a headphone jack.
Yeah. The speakers don't get exceptionally loud, I will say, at max volume, but again, it does come with a kind of a controller, like 3DoF, 3 degrees of freedom controller, just like Daydream does. Right. Same thing as the headset. It is 3DoF. So that essentially means that it can measure movement in 3 dimensions, but not in 6. The 6DoF is the other kind of big one. That's like if you take a step forward or backward, does it track that? And this device doesn't do that. And I will say, it's been a while since I've used a VR system that wasn't externally tracked or had 6DoF capability. So the fact that when I was in that the Star Wars kind of VR experience that I downloaded, when I leaned forward a little bit, purposefully leaned forward a little bit, and the environment doesn't negotiate that, it doesn't indicate that I've done that, it is still off-putting, right? And it's still kind of like, okay, I could see how people might not like this. They recommend you sit down when you use this, because that will greatly prevent those types of things from happening, from you leaning forward, stepping forward, etc. And there's also no capability, there's no what do you call it? The system where it shows grids around the area, right? So you don't walk into something or run into something. None of that exists.
We should point out, so for those of you who are not particularly familiar with VR vernacular, 3 degrees of freedom essentially means forward and back, up and down, and then left and right. And then when you get into pitch, yaw, and roll, that's the 6 degrees of freedom. I mean, what happens when you sort of like, look up like this or like that, or what can you look, can you comfortably look around like this inside of there, or to think, okay.
Yeah.
But when
you don't have to be perfectly rigid. You don't have to be perfectly rigid, but it's like if you look down, that's fine. If I look down and then want to lean down or crouch down to touch something, it doesn't know that, right? It's not capable of measuring that. So, and in many ways, that's how all of the slot-in phone versions of VR have worked since the beginning, and this is still a push for that. So it's not a revolutionary thing, but again, for $199, you can buy them at Best Buy. It does some things. It's like I said, I wore it for about an hour and 45 minutes straight, which is more than I've worn a VR headset in a long time. And I didn't have any discomfort either from eye fatigue or nausea or like it just fitting poorly. It all seems to work pretty well. Do I think that this changes the landscape of VR immediately? Probably not. But it's the right move, I think these untethered headsets still have the most potential. You're going to have a very different experience, obviously, because you're gaming on a Snapdragon 821 device as opposed to a GTX 1080 Ti. So keep that in mind. But so far, I like it. And I went out to Best Buy whenever they launched, Tuesday, I guess it was, Monday, Tuesday, and picked it up. It is built by Xiaomi, which is kind of interesting. But it's a neat product. It's better than I expected to be for $199. I thought we were going to see the beginning of the end of VR and kind of this pessimistic view, but the image quality is good. The little accents like adding speakers to it is really good. Comfort is good. Yeah, I've been impressed.
And we should point out, when you've been talking about a VR experience, for most of the last couple of years, it's either been an expensive desktop PC and an expensive piece of hardware. And then, of course, the hardware dropped down to like $400 in the case of the Oculus Rift. And then the price finally came down on the Vive. And then you have a physical cable tethering you to that desktop, or you were doing the smartphone stuff, which is really kind of a fascinating taster, but I think more often than not was fairly frustrating in terms of the experience, especially in the cases where you were like, I'm going to tap on the side of this plastic thing I've strapped to my face because that's the only way I can control it. To, you know, you've got like the Oculus Go, I want to say the Mirage Solo, Lenovo's Mirage Solo with Daydream, which has the WorldSense technology, so you can lean and duck and move inside of things. That's gonna, you know, those are pre-ordered for like $400. One thing I want to ask you, because I'm circling picking up one of the Oculus Go's to do a review of it, 32 gigs or 64 gigs? Because by nature, I always want to get more memory, but you know, do the apps for that take up much space?
I would say yes, right? So one of the other demos so you download this Disney demo and it has a bunch of options in Marvel or Disney or Star Wars, like little experiences you can do. Some of them are interactive, most of them are not. And they give you the option of streaming or downloading, right? And it's the streaming is, you know, lower resolution. You might get some frame stutters, which is obviously a bad idea in VR. So I was always downloading everything. And each of these was about 1 gig to 2 gigs a piece. I downloaded a Jurassic World thing, which was a small experience where you followed around a velociraptor as it kind of interacted with some other dinosaurs. And the download wasn't working on it, but it was like a 3 gig, 4 gig download. So I do think probably the higher capacity is better, because remember, you're getting 32 gigs minus whatever the operating system is. I haven't figured out a way to look into it and see exactly what that is. I will note that, for example, that tried to do the streaming of the Jurassic World event thing. And they must have been having some capacity issues, because it was hard stuttering quite a bit. It was unnerving for me to look at this dinosaur up close and suddenly have the dinosaur itself start macro blocking, because you know the bandwidth was low, and then it would kind of go more into focus and then out of focus. It was very it took you out of the experience pretty dramatically. So I would count on downloading everything, so you're going to use a lot of space. But I can't say for sure. My guess is that you would just, for $50, buy the 64 gig model. You know, $50 for 32 gigs of storage is kind of a bad deal, I guess. But if you separate them by anything less than that, nobody would buy the smaller one. And I think they desperately wanted to get to that $199 price tag. So
interesting.